You know, I sometimes wonder, Les, when I think back over 40 years, maybe not for me, not 40 years, but for you, close to 40 years, as to how have we been as successful as a chapter as we have been. I mean, this chapter continues to amaze me. We kid sometimes that we think back to when we were the president or the chairman of the chapter, and we thought we were a pretty slick organization. But we had very few programs at that particular. We basically ran a monthly program.
That was it.
Then somewhere, I think when I was getting involved, we created a CIO roundtable. It was probably in the mid 1980s. But until that's all we did, and we had trouble with administration. Now we absolutely marvel at the complexity of this particular chapter. So many roundtables, so many activities, so many programs going on constantly. So the current leadership should be very proud of themselves that they keep it under control. I'm not sure how we would have kept it under control without the systems that they have now put into place. So there's no question that the thing is different. But one of the things, if you had to think about one thing that you perhaps as one of the founders, and then we did early on in the leadership, what was some of the things that we did that set the stage that the chapter has continued to be successful in all these years?
I think the structure that we put together that brings people up through the chapter to become a president, and which was chairman initially,
Right.
and then to stay on the board over time. Although you and I are not as active in the chapter as we once were, we're still, I'm chairman emeritus, and you're still actively on the board. And we do that through our SIM Silver, but we keep people actively involved. And I think the other part of it is we become friends, and we're all friendly with each other. It's not an organization that we go to the monthly meeting or we go to a meeting and we go home and we never see the person again. We play golf with each other. We do other things. There was one group of 6 chairmen, ex-chairmen, that we used to get together once a month for a long, long time. That was John Dacey, Don Brown, Ralph Lofton, Warren Harkness, Bart Bolton, and myself. And we fundamentally just liked each other, and we continue to like each other and continue to get together.
But structurally, you mentioned structure. The structure element that I like and have always espoused when I've talked to other chapters, and I have talked to other chapters, and that is the idea of keeping the past president, past chairman involved by making them a trustee.
Yep.
And there are trustees today on the board of directors of the organization. And that's particularly important because it keeps the institutional knowledge alive and working on the day-to-day activities of the chapter. And that was one of the things that I think back to, one of the activities that's very big part of the Boston chapter now got going because of the trustee session. Let me try to explain. I was a trustee, but my work had me traveling constantly. And as you recall, I was not very loyal to SIM meetings because I had to be in some city somewhere around the country. But I was a trustee and very proud of that. So all of a sudden, some of the leadership of the chapter pulled me aside one day and said, "Sweet, you're not active enough. If you're not active, you are not going to be a trustee any longer." And I said, "So what do you need from me?" And they said, "Well, we got this thing called outreach that we don't know what to do with it. We need somebody to pull it together and start an outreach program." And so I said, "Okay, let me give it a try." And I went out and I reached out to all kinds of other leaders in the chapter and said, "Let's get together and talk about outreach." And that was really where the connection between the Boston chapter of SIM and Year Up began.
Yep.
And I believe that that is perhaps the greatest thing that I had a finger in, was the fact that we were able to connect this chapter with give back and outreach to our profession. And so, because of the trustee thing, I mean, I think that was probably the reason why I got involved. If they hadn't told me, "You're going to have to get out of here," and I said, "I don't want to leave SIM. It's too important to me."
If you think about outreach, one of the other reasons that we've been successful, I think, is that we're willing to take risk. We're willing to try things.
Absolutely.
We tried multiple outreach activities early on, and none of them were very successful. We did scholarships, yep.
Scholarships.
We funded research for local IT faculty members, and none of it really stuck. and it was hard to administer, and it wasn't very successful. But then when we came across the Europe program and other events like that, or
Well,
other
Europe has started,
organizations
but
like
now
that,
we have multiples
I
of
know,
them,
I know.
and that's all extremely powerful.
That's right.
And the other thing I think that the Boston chapter has done, that very few other chapters around the country have done, and that is that I can recall back in those mid 1980s when I would be in the leadership role and then would also be on the board of International SIM. In those days, you were involved at two levels, local chapter as well as international board. And Warren McFarland and I used to attend some of those meetings together, and Warren and I used to kid that the Boston chapter is doing well because we are subscribing to, as we used to kid, the Massachusetts liberal model. And it meant that you didn't have to be just the CIO to be an active participant in the chapter. You could be an academic, or you could be a thought leader from the consulting field. And anybody in there who has an interest in IT, who cares about the evolvement of IT, should participate. Mm-hmm. And as a result, there were times when the leadership was made up of IT people, all IT people, but from a different background. And I think that's been very powerful.
We had heavy academic input early on, probably for the first 10 or 15 years.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of heavy academic input from Harvard with Warren McFarland and Dick Nolan, from MIT with Jack Brockhart, and mm-hmm. so forth. And they really brought a different flavor to the meetings that you might have gotten if you went to Minneapolis or you went to Chicago or a place like that.
No question. And Babson played a big role in many different ways.
Yeah. One story I just want to tell about Dick Harris. Dick was the founder, along with John Dacey, as we've mentioned. He loved to sail. And so he came to Scituate to visit me one time. We went out sailing in my boat. And he said while we were out sailing, he said, we ought to propose a research project because we really don't know what these people do, these CIOs, we didn't use that term, the information people that we deal with. He said, we don't really know what they do. And he said, we ought to propose a research project. So I put together a proposal, and he took it to SIM, and they approved it. And we worked with Jack Brockhart, and we interviewed a number of people around the country, including Dick Dooley, to find out what the role of this person was. And we wrote a special paper that went into the SIM Quarterly, and actually it was a 5th edition one time, so it was called the Fifthly. And it was entitled Chief Executives Define Their Information Role. And at I think it was 81 or 82, at a national meeting, Jack gets up and starts talking about the paper and all the stuff we found out and so forth. And he says, this person is kind of like the chief financial officer. Maybe it's the chief information officer. And I think if you look back over time, at that time there was a CEO and there was a CFO, and we never had the big C's as we mm-hmm. talk about them today.
Right.
And from that exploded the term Chief Information Officer. And I think then you see in other areas the Chief Marketing Officer, the Chief Production Officer, whatever it may be. Chief Technology Officer has come from that as well.
I mean, you can always have an argument about who came up with the term,
yep.
But there was also a book written in 1980, 1981, thereabouts, and one of the fellow was a leader in our chapter, was a fellow, Bill Sinnott, who was the CIO at First National Bank of Boston, I think it was called probably in those days.
Yeah, and he was either a 4th or 5th president.
Yeah, and Bill likes to think that he was the guy who coined the term CIO, but I can recall that book was like hot off the press. And when I was a CIO at Wang Laboratories, I was handed the book by Dr. Wang and said, there's some interesting reading in there. Look up that thing about that role, because that's what we're looking for. Okay, I didn't know what the term meant, hadn't heard it before, but he had found the book through somebody and said, that's what we want you to be going forward. So I think that, there's a connection to SIM through all of these things is pretty exciting. If I was to think about the things that I would love to say I had my finger in, I'm not saying that I was responsible or instigating, but I was a part of. The second thing after outreach would be what we've come to know and love as the RLF. I had been asked to participate in groups, the Dick Dooley focus, where he would bring CIOs together. People like Warren Harkness and I would go to meetings 3-4 times a year with Dick, when Dick was facilitating these groups. And we recognized the fact that we were having a blast being a CIO, but what were we going to do? Where was the next generation going to be coming from? Dick took that on as a challenge and created a program that he offered across companies, and that was called LLF. And from that evolved the RLF program. And so I like to think that I was a big advocate of this changing from the LLF model to the Regional Leadership Forum that we have today. And that has been so successful. And I think if that's probably given the leadership to the Boston chapter, because we brought in new blood constantly coming into the chapter who are evolving out of RLF and then now understand what leadership is all about. It's not management training, it's leadership. And only Dick Dooley will talk about that.
When I was president in 81, we got our new charter, and we became the first chartered organization or chapter that has lived to be 40 years old. But there was a lot of other things going on, and one of the things that I think I'm pretty proud of is that we adopted a model at that time that said, look, all of the people we've got as members are managing technology, and they've all got pretty good technology backgrounds, but they need information about management and leadership. So we decided that we would alternate meetings. One would be a technology meeting, the next one would be something on leadership and so forth. So the Boston area is just filled with wonderful people who can talk about leadership issues, management issues, and so forth. And obviously technology. I mean, we had the founder of Lotus 123 as a speaker at one point. We had a number of different people who were involved in technology at that time. So we bounced back and forth. And so I think people got the feeling that they were not only getting updated on what's going on in technology, but getting a better feel for what they should do as a manager and as a leader in the information technology
To
area.
me, what the help was thought leadership.
Yes.
I mean, if as CIOs you were so busy keeping the snakes away from the door and
Right.
surviving in your own little world and getting to do it again another day, you didn't take the time. And I don't know about you, but when I was a CIO, particularly at Wang, I mean, I was working 70 hours a week, going full speed all the time. I didn't go home and sit down and read the journals and the magazines and the books that I probably should have read, simply because I was probably exhausted at the end of the day. And so therefore I needed other ways to get other ways to look at the same problem. And every once in a while, and I don't want to name a particular academic, but I can recall times when I hear someone talk about, are they experiencing this kind of a problem? Here's a way out of the problem. And I'd say, aha, why didn't I think of that?
Right.
I've got that kind of a problem, but now I've got some help from the outside. So that, I think the fact that that was a part of the model, whether everybody realized it or not, it was very, very helpful to all of us.
And we used our money in a variety of different ways, and sometimes there were some funny stories that came out of using
Tell
the
us a
money.
couple. You've got a couple of beauties.
Well, Irwin Abrams was one of our presidents at one point, and at that time we were running just luncheon meetings, 10 of them a year, and we would always give a present to the speaker. And so we decided that we would give pens to the speaker, cross pens, which was the tradition in that era to do it with people.
Local Rhode Island company, we had to give them the
That's
business.
right. So Irwin finds that we should put the little logo of SIM on the pin, and he also found that if we bought 500, he could get a real good price. So he bought 500 with the logo. Immediately thereafter, Sim changed the logo. So now we have the old logo on 500 pens, and we only use 10 a year. So what we started doing was giving a pen out to every member of the board at the annual meeting. So before long, we used up the pens, but we each had 5 or 6 pens. But he had the CIO roundtable there, and Dave loved to order very expensive wine. And so he did, and it went and it went and it went all over the restaurant. So there was a lot of wine being served that night. Dave tells it that it was so expensive that Big Cy came out and thanked him personally for having the group meeting there. And I think he spent $3,000 or $4,000 on wine that particular night, which we never let Dave pick out the wine at any event we're into today.
Absolutely. Sim Silver meetings now, anybody but Dave gets to select the wine.
That's right.
It may not be as fine as Dave, but we can afford it.
But we always tell that story. There's a lot of other reasons, I think, why we continue to grow and we continue to be perceived, perhaps, if you will, as an organization to look up to. And I think it's part of the camaraderie that we have, and we really get to know each other and like each other. And you brought up the point of going around the country and inviting people to join SIM. And I think we've done that in the Boston area very well.
No question.
And we've worked very hard at doing that. When we hear of somebody moving into a role, particularly from outside of the geographical area, we'll make sure we invite them to a meeting or do something like that. And we really are a friendly group, if you will.
Well, I mean, that's, we're not just insular in our own little world, because there's a number of people who are consultants. And the consultants, they're traveling about our geography, and so therefore they hear many times that so-and-so is joining, or they're creating the CIO role in some company. And so they might be out there trying to recruit people for this person, or they might be out there trying to sell their business that doesn't make any difference, because they know how to behave inside of SIM. The fact of the matter is that they then will issue the invitation to come be a participant in SIM. And so we're always out there because we have a mixture of backgrounds in the membership, and that just causes you to create more members. At the same time, I think that we've been willing to, we've mentioned Sim Silver, you've mentioned the CIO Roundtable. There's been various other little spin-off groups of the main membership that has allowed other people who have IT, in their veins, but they need to have a slightly different perspective. So therefore, help desk roundtables. And I believe that for a while there was a consultant roundtable as well, particularly for the smaller consultancies, not the large ones, but the independent or the 2 or 3 consultant kind of an organization, meet and share ideas with those people as well. So we try things. We're not afraid to try anything, because we've got experience behind us. We know that we can be successful because we've been successful. And I think we'll take a chance.
Well, the other part of that is it's all networking. And we know that in life, networking is what makes people successful. And I think everybody picks that up very quickly, that it's a great networking organization. And I think that you and I are examples of that. I think that I helped you get a job, and later on you helped me get a job.
Oh, really? I have to think about that. I try not to work anymore, so forget about that.
Yeah, that was many years ago, when your mind was still something other than mush.
Yeah, okay. Plus, we have a great opportunity here. The chapter leadership, the current chapter leadership may be listening to what we're saying. So we probably should tell them what they should be doing going forward. As the elder statesman of Boston SIM, I think this is a unique opportunity to give direction and thought to the current leadership. You got any suggestions?
Well, one of the issues that we talked about a good 12 or 15 years ago was what happens when we get out of our IT roles, and we often lose it, and we're not up to date in technology and so forth. And that's why we created Sim Silver. And so Sim Silver is for people like you and I at that time thinking about retiring and what does it mean. And so Sim Silver is a group of people that get together quarterly, and we have a variety of different subjects. And you've gotten a lot of the people to come speak, but we talk about technology a little bit. We've talked about social media. We've talked about artificial intelligence.
And preparation for retirement.
And preparation for
We've
retirement.
done everything from how do you prepare yourself financially, how do you keep yourself busy, when you're no longer going to that desk for 50 hours a week like you do when you're the CIO. I mean, now all of a sudden you've got to have some other interests. So what might some of those interests be?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we can't lose track of our roots, which are deeply buried in technology. So we challenge ourselves to bring speakers in to talk about what's this current state of the art of technology and learn about it so that we at least feel grounded as we always have been in technology.
But I think there's another element that it makes it successful for us. We've always liked and worked with each other and thought we knew each other, but we've had people do biographies. And so they would tell us their life story from the time they were born. And I learned so much about different people that I didn't know. I learned about their military experience. I learned about their college experience, their family
And
experiences.
you didn't know
and
that
so
I was
forth.
raised on a chicken farm.
I didn't know you were raised in a
so I
chicken
used
farm.
to feed chickens. I mean, that's the things you don't need to know.
And you're still feeding chickens, but so all of those things I think bring us together and keep us connected to the organization. I mean, we may not be going to the dinner meetings as much as we used to, but at least we're still connected and we feel a part of the
But
organization.
the reason why Sim Silva has continued on now for probably a dozen years is because it began when we were still sitting in the chairs.
Correct.
And so therefore we knew we were going to transition at some point, but the chapter took a chance on us, just like they've taken chances and have invested in programs. So they gamble, if you wish, and they have some endowment to allow you to start something, see how it works out. And
Right.
maybe it's going to succeed, maybe it's going to fail. There's probably some things that have been started here that just didn't get any traction and they've been discarded. But you need to take a risk, you need to try something out, you need to advertise it, promote it, give it a good shot. And if it's successful, fantastic. Boston will grow larger and larger with that kind of an approach to running the whole chapter.
Right. I agree.